3 days, 20 experts, hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting fees, and a $120 million contract teetering on the edge of collapse. Inside the top-floor boardroom of Harrison Robotics, the air was as heavy as the fog over San Francisco Bay. Error charts bled red and tangled lines of code flickered across a massive LED screen like a stubborn storm that refused to clear. Just when everyone seemed ready to accept defeat, the door eased open. A man in a faded grey uniform stepped in, a mop in his left hand, one earbud dangling from his ear. He glanced up at the whiteboard, narrowing his eyes as if he just spotted something no one else could see. This was Daniel Hayes, the night shift janitor of the building, and in the next few minutes he would do what 20 experts could not: turn the entire situation around with nothing but a marker and a few strokes. What he didn't know was that at the far end of the hallway, Olivia Harrison, the coldest CEO in Silicon Valley, had been standing there all along, watching his every move and what she was about to do next. It would change both their stories forever. The sound of heels clicked steadily against the polished wooden floor, cutting through the tense murmurs of engineers struggling to find a solution. Olivia Harrison, 42, stood at the head of a long conference table cluttered with laptops, papers and cups of cold coffee. Her black hair was pinned in a tight bun, her charcoal grey suit tailored to precision, and her eyes sharp as blades swept across every face. "We spent 3 days, held 6 emergency meetings, and burned through $500,000 in consulting fees. And what do we have now? A mess." Her voice was as cold as the morning wind over the Golden Gate Bridge. No one spoke. Sweat dotted foreheads. Some stared down at their screens, avoiding her gaze. On the massive LED board, error charts glowed crimson, and lines of chaotic code flickered like a portrait of failure. Olivia took a breath, stepped toward the door. 5 minutes. "I want a solution, not another apology." The door closed softly behind her, leaving the bitter smell of burnt coffee and the crushing weight of pressure. Out in the hallway, Daniel Hayes bent down to pick up a soda can that had rolled out of an overfilled trash bin. His faded grey uniform, worn-out shoes, and one dangling earbud made him look like any other night janitor. But his eyes weren't on the trash. They were locked on the whiteboard inside the conference room, where a tangle of equations waited, like a riddle begging to be solved. Daniel, 36, night janitor at Harrison Robotics. Few knew he had once been a top AI student at Stanford University, first in his class until life handed him a far harder test: the sudden death of his young wife and raising their 3-year-old daughter Emily alone. When the lights in the conference room still burned, but the engineers had left in silence, Daniel stepped inside. He set his mop in the corner and walked up to the board. The equations sprawled across it like a battlefield, twisted logic loops and distorted data sets. He raised his cleaning rag, then stopped. "Wait," he murmured. It wasn't textbook logic. It was instinct. Something was wrong at the very foundation of the model. He picked up a red marker. The sound of heels clicked steadily against the polished wooden floor, cutting through the tense murmurs of engineers struggling to find a solution. Olivia Harrison, 42, stood at the head of a long conference table cluttered with laptops, papers and cups of cold coffee. Her black hair was pinned in a tight bun, her charcoal grey suit tailored to precision, and her eyes sharp as blades swept across every face. "We spent 3 days, held 6 emergency meetings, and burned through $500,000 in consulting fees. And what do we have now? A mess." Her voice was as cold as the morning wind over the Golden Gate Bridge. No one spoke. Sweat dotted foreheads. Some stared down at their screens, avoiding her gaze. On the massive LED board, error charts glowed crimson, and lines of chaotic code flickered like a portrait of failure. Olivia took a breath, stepped toward the door. 5 minutes. "I want a solution, not another apology." The door closed softly behind her, leaving the bitter smell of burnt coffee and the crushing weight of pressure. Out in the hallway, Daniel Hayes bent down to pick up a soda can that had rolled out of an overfilled trash bin. His faded grey uniform, worn-out shoes, and one dangling earbud made him look like any other night janitor. But his eyes weren't on the trash. They were locked on the whiteboard inside the conference room, where a tangle of equations waited, like a riddle begging to be solved. Daniel, 36, night janitor at Harrison Robotics. Few knew he had once been a top AI student at Stanford University, first in his class, until life handed him a far harder test. The sudden death of his young wife and raising their 3-year-old daughter Emily alone, when the lights in the conference room still burned. But the engineers had left in silence. Daniel stepped inside. He set his mop in the corner and walked up to the board. The equations sprawled across it like a battlefield, twisted logic loops and distorted data sets. He raised his cleaning rag, then stopped. "Wait," he murmured. "It wasn't textbook logic, it was instinct." Something was wrong at the very foundation of the model. He picked up a red marker, his calloused fingers tightening around its plastic barrel. For the first time in 5 years, he let the part of his brain he'd locked away flare to life. The numbers and symbols ceased to be a chaotic mess. They became a landscape, a topography of failure. He saw it not as a programmer, but as a systems thinker, a problem solver who understood that elegance often lay in simplicity. The core issue wasn't in the complex neural network layers they'd been debugging. It was in the primary feedback loop governing the robot's spatial awareness. A single minus sign where a plus should have been, buried 3 pages back in the initial assumptions. A cascading error, the kind a tired, over-specialized team would miss because they were looking at the leaves, not the root. With 3 decisive strokes, he circled the offending line of calculus, drew a bold arrow to a fresh section of the board, and rewrote the foundational equation. He didn't write a new algorithm. He corrected a 5-year-old's arithmetic mistake, made by a brilliant but hurried PhD. The simplicity of it was almost laughable. He capped the marker, the soft click echoing in the silent room. He had just turned to retrieve his mop when a voice, cool and measured, sliced through the air from the doorway. "Explain it to me." Olivia Harrison stood there, a silhouette against the bright hallway lights. She had seen everything. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable, but her eyes burned with an intensity that could melt steel. Daniel froze, the janitorial persona slamming back into place. He wiped his hands on his uniform. "Ma'am, I was just cleaning. I saw a mistake. A mistake that 20 experts and $500,000 missed," she stated, stepping fully into the room. Her heels were silent now on the plush carpet. She stopped before the whiteboard, her gaze tracing his red marks. "This equation, this is the core of our proprioceptive calibration." "It is," Daniel said, his voice low. "And you changed it." "I corrected it." The sign was wrong. It inverted the feedback. The robot isn't confused by its environment. It's receiving inverted data about its own limb positions. It thinks a forward step is a backward step. Every subsequent patch has just been a workaround for that original sin. Olivia turned from the board to look at him, really look at him. She saw the intelligence in his weary eyes, the steady hands of a man who built and fixed things, not just cleaned around them. "What's your name?" "Daniel Hayes, night maintenance." "You're not just maintenance." "Daniel Hayes, you solved in 3 minutes what my entire team couldn't in 72 hours. "Who are you?" The directness of the question left no room for evasion. Daniel felt the walls he'd built around his past tremble. "I was a student, a long time ago, at Stanford, AI and systems theory." "Why are you here?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was a demand for data, for the missing variable in her analysis of him. Daniel's jaw tightened. He thought of Emily, asleep in their small apartment, of the life he'd pieced together from the wreckage. Life happened. This job provides. It's steady. Olivia was silent for a full minute, studying him, then the board, then him again. A decision crystallized in her mind, swift and irreversible. "Steady is underpaying you by a factor of about 500. The consulting firm was billing us $800 an hour per person. You just provided more value than all of them combined." She walked to the conference phone and pressed a button. "Mark, assemble the team. Now we have a breakthrough." Before Daniel could protest, engineers and experts began to flood back into the room, their confusion turning to shock as Olivia directed them to the whiteboard. "Review this correction. Run the simulation now." The room erupted into a controlled frenzy. Keyboards clacked. The massive LED screen refreshed. The chaotic red error waves began to smooth, the tangled code lines straightening into orderly, executable commands. A green "calibration complete" flashed across the display. A stunned silence fell, followed by a collective exhale. The $120 million contract with the Department of Defense was no longer teetering. It was secured. Olivia turned to the room. "Everyone, this is Daniel Hayes. You will listen to him. For the remainder of this crisis resolution, he is leading the technical review." Then to Daniel she said, "My office, now." The walk to the corner office was a blur. Daniel, still in his janitor's uniform, followed Olivia past the stunned gazes of executives and assistants. Her office was a glass-walled expanse overlooking the dark, fog-shrouded bay. She closed the door, shutting out the world. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair. She didn't sit behind her desk, but leaned against its edge, facing him. "I've spent my career building this company on merit, on the ruthless pursuit of the best mind for the problem. I just watched the best mind in this building walk in with a mop. I need to know why, and I need to know what you want." Daniel felt a surge of defiance, mixed with a long-buried pride. "What I want? I want to be home before my daughter wakes up. I want to know she has a stable future. What happened tonight? It was an accident. I saw a problem and I fixed it. That's all." "That's not all," Olivia countered, her voice softening a fraction, the first crack in her icy demeanor. "That was genius. Pure applied genius. The kind that builds industries. The kind I need." She stood up straight. "I am offering you a position as the senior systems architect for the Atlas project. Effective immediately. Salary is $400,000 a year, plus equity. You'll report directly to me." The number hung in the air, astronomical, impossible. It was a lifeline thrown into the storm of his life. But Daniel was wary. The corporate world, with its politics and pressures, had broken him once before, in the aftermath of his loss. "Why? Because I fixed a sign error?" "Because you saw the sign error. That's the difference. I'm not offering you a job for what you did. I'm offering it for how you saw. This company is filled with people who can write code. I need someone who can see truth." She paused. "And because I believe in second acts, Daniel, even in Silicon Valley." Daniel thought of Emily, of the ballet classes he couldn't afford, the worry in her eyes when the rent was due, the way she'd started drawing pictures of robots, just like the ones he cleaned around. This was more than a job. It was a key to a life of security, of possibility for Hearn. "I have conditions," he said, the words surprising him with their firmness. "I need flexibility for my daughter. I won't miss her school plays or bedtime. And my team, I work with respect or I don't work." A ghost of a smile touched Olivia's lips. It transformed her face, revealing the woman beneath the CEO. "Those aren't conditions. Those are standards, agreed." She extended her hand. Daniel looked at his own, still faintly stained with red marker ink, and shook hers. Her grip was firm, certain. The deal was sealed, not just for a job, but for a new trajectory. "Go home," Olivia said. "Be with your daughter. HR will call you at 9 a.m. We start tomorrow." As Daniel walked out of the Harrison Robotics tower that night, the fog was beginning to lift. The weight of the mop in his hand felt different, no longer a symbol of what he had lost, but a tool from an old life he was stepping out of. He drove to his modest apartment, his mind buzzing. He opened the door to Emily's room, where she slept curled around a stuffed robot toy. He kissed her forehead, a wave of profound relief and hope washing over him. Back in her office, Olivia Harrison stood at the window, watching the taillights of Daniel's old car disappear into the night. For the first time in 3 days, the knot of tension in her shoulders had eased. She had saved the contract, but she had also found something far more valuable, an unexpected variable, a solution from the most improbable source. She knew the story would leak, become a Silicon Valley legend, the janitor who saved the $120 million deal. But for her, the real story was just beginning. It was the story of redemption, of hidden potential, and of a cold CEO who had learned that brilliance could be found in the quietest corners. If only one knew how to look. And in that discovery, both of their lives, once on parallel tracks of quiet struggle and isolated pressure, had irrevocably intertwined, set on a new, uncharted and extraordinary course. Their future was no longer written in lines of failing code, but in the infinite possibilities of a problem finally, elegantly, solved. If you were inspired by this story of hidden genius and unexpected redemption, please show your support for our channel. Like, share, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories for more compelling narratives that remind us that potential and kindness can be found in the most surprising places. Your engagement helps us bring more of these powerful tales to light.